about the Romans, because the Romans are the ones who are actually the Latin language, right? That actually really lives on to today. Uh, and yeah, like in the scientific names of okay, like lead, right? Why is it called Pb in the periodic table, right? Because of the Roman word plumbum. It's and that's actually your root word for the word plumbing as well. So all your plumbing systems, all your plumber is all from that Roman word. Okay, but let me just continue on with my presentation. Uh, yeah, today's talk will be about lessons that we can learn from these two civilizations, the Greeks and the Romans. I know the slide title is a bit different from the title of the Zoom meeting, but this was the title I used for the talk at Stephen's kids' school. So I haven't changed my slide since then. And yeah, but the content is, although it's the same content, it was actually targeted for I guess a more mature audience. So yeah, we will definitely go through some of the more mature themes, right? How they actually affect today's world, and beyond just the Greek stories and the Greek mathematics, and yeah, the more accessible stuff to kids. We definitely touch on like some more in-depth discussion about our society as well. And and I think that brings us to the next slide, very nicely, the next slide, which is something that Winston Churchill had said, which is those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So hopefully we do not repeat the mistakes of the past, and that's why sessions like this are something that I'm glad to see that Stephen has actually arranged for it. So thanks, Stephen. Okay, so as a brief overview of history, right? We usually divide our historical records into these three large, broad periods: ancient history, the Middle Ages, and the modern period, right? So I don't need you to remember the exact dates, because this is but you should be aware of the rough time period, which is like yeah, if you know the BCE and CE, so it used to be just BC and AD. So but currently historians have updated it to use BCE and CE instead. So for where the dividing line is drawn, which would be the 0 year is still considered the year of the birth of Christ, right? So so the numberings are still the same. It's just that they swapped the name, because BC and AD used to be a Latin name, right? But now it's changed to a English name, which is before Christian era and Christian era. So yeah, it just makes more English sense. But this is just the rough dates. So ancient history, 3000 to about 500. So negative 3000 to 500. So it's quite a long period of history. Then we have 1,000 years. That is this weird thing that we call the Middle Ages. And after today, perhaps you will come to understand a bit more why they actually call this period the Middle Ages, because you can really feel like it's a whole different chunk of history that has been taken off the historical records, which you will hopefully you will come to understand why the people feel that they need to make this distinction of this Middle Ages in this 1,000 years in between. And for now, we are living in the modern period. So from just 500 years ago, 1,500, so that's 500 years ago, to today, the present day. Okay, so these are just some important events, right, in which marks the distinction between all these periods of history. So History, of course, begins when people, not just when they discover historical artifacts, but when actual history is written down. So earliest recorded history, that was back then in the ancient times in 2600 BCE. So that's more than that's around 5,000 years ago, a bit less than 5,000 years, but that's around that time period. So history is about 5,000 years in total, written history records. And then when this ended, when ancient history ended and when the Middle Ages begins, that's when we have the fall of the Western Roman Empire. We usually just take it to be simply called the fall of the Roman Empire, but historians like to make a distinction that it's only the Western Roman Empire that fell and not the entire Roman Empire. But it's a significant enough event that it actually caused a change in the time periods of history. So it's the actual date 476 CE, and the next period would begin when there's a couple of events that are quite significant. So some people would like to start it at the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire, which would be the remaining part of the Roman Empire that's still left over from after the Western Roman Empire collapsed. We usually call them the Byzantine Empire. That happened 1453. Or another significant event is the discovery of the New World. Okay, so Christopher Columbus' voyage to the New World. And yeah, although it is a significant event, it is not just the only event, but it was one of the more significant events that led to a series of events that actually really changed how the world works in the form of like globalization. So like globalization became a thing again in the modern period because of the discovery of the Americas, but not just that, but also the discovery of the East Indian companies and stuff like that, where you have the trade routes to China by the sea. So a lot of things, mainly globalization that took place that marks the start of the modern period. And you'll be wondering like, oh, is that the only time that there's globalization? No, actually there's a lot of globalization happening as well at the I wouldn't say the tail end, but like at the last 1,000 years of Asian history, you also find this kind of globalization period. It's not to the Americas, but it's a lot of trading being done by multiple countries at an international level. So that's one thing to take note of. But so this is the rough division between the three periods. So you will just have an idea that it's being divided into these three periods, because we'll come back to this again, and you will see how this division actually gets illuminated because of the events that happen in history. Okay, so let's go on. I want to cover things a bit much more faster over here. So when we think of ancient Greece, and we'll start off with ancient Greece first, because the ancient Greek civilization comes before the ancient Roman civilization. So when we think about ancient Greece, we think about some things that are even influencing the way we look at the world today. This is the idea of a Greek city-state. It is built on top of a hill, and it controls the surrounding areas. So it controls the farmlands around there. It controls the trade routes that go around the area. So it's this whole concept of a city-state. And the hill is, of course, a defensible position that if enemies attack, they can actually withdraw up to a safe location up the hill. Okay, so the second picture over here on the top right corner is Greek art, but it also signifies one of the more important uh, events in Greek culture, which is the Olympics. And the Olympics is, of course, a sporting event that still exists in today's world because we copied the whole idea of the Greek tradition of countries being at peace and celebrating that peace by participating in competition, but in a friendly format, a friendly competition of sporting events. And it is a way. It back then in Greek culture, this was a way, right, that the Greeks actually maintained the friendly relationship between the different Greek cities, right? And that really like helps to form this idea of a unified or united Greek culture. Okay, over here we see a comic book page, but this comic book page is influenced by the Greek gods, right? The Greek gods and goddess. So this is the Greek pantheon of gods, and you see in the middle here it's Zeus, and with Athena on his left. Yeah, so some of the more influential gods, and it still makes its way into our comics today. And on the right, we see a Greek philosopher, and yeah, and yeah, so it's a modern statue that has obviously been maintained for cultural value, and probably rightfully so. And so we still see that Greek culture is alive and well in today's world. All right, so let's move on. Okay, so with that, I'll just elaborate a bit on the Greek history. I don't want to go too much into details, but I just want to give an idea of like how Greek civilization became how it was, right? How it gained its influence, like how they identify themselves as, and things like that. Why they developed the characteristics that they did back then in history. Okay, so one of the important things is that the Greek cities, they actually gained their influence because they were merchant city states. And the thing about being merchant city states is that they 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 are in this unique position in the Mediterranean Sea. As you can see, is this purple area here in the slides, right? They are in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, which is actually along many major trade routes that will bring goods from one end of the Mediterranean to another end of the Mediterranean. Greece is perfectly positioned in the middle of all of them. And one other thing that the Greeks did, right, was that they went to set up trading colonies all across the Mediterranean to help them develop their trade routes. This in turn, right, led not just to an exchange of goods, but also to an exchange of culture, techniques, inventions, and a lot more of other things in which they can just pick up from the surrounding areas and, you know, really gathered all of it, gathered all these ideas, gathered all these techniques, right, back home in their Greek cities. And that's how the this whole why we have Greek philosophy, why we have Greek science, Greek mathematics, and all that is because these people have traveled to many places in the world and brought back their knowledge back home. And at home, they finally have the time to sit down, analyze, and come up with a working framework in which to understand the world. And understand the world through all these different ideas in which they have collected, right? And so this is a really important aspect of how their civilization developed. Okay, so we now move on to the next stage of history is that what happened next, right, was that uh, in the in the next few hundred years, right, one of the greatest threats to Greek civilization actually arose. And this is where you really see the Greek identity solidify, because it has to defend itself against this external threat. And this external threat is called the Persian Empire. And if you look at the map over here, you will find that Persia is this huge continent, it exists in this huge area in the Asia continent, while Greece itself, right, at the height of the Persian Empire, right, Greece itself have been relegated to just this small area that is on their home, yeah, near their homeland, and it really was a fight for survival for the Greeks, because the Persia had so much vast amount of resources and armies, right, in which they could easily march into Greece if they want to, and many times they did. Uh, so it was up to the Greeks to defend themselves, and we even see this whole idea play out, right, about how Greeks had to band together to fight against this Persian invasion, right. One of the more famous one would be the movie 300, where you have the 300 Spartans, right, sacrificing their lives to just ensure that the invasion is stopped, so that the rest of the Greeks can actually unite and collaborate to fend off, to prepare themselves against the threat. So it was really this this serious threat towards the existence of Greece itself. But eventually, the Persian Empire would fall, and we'll move on to the next slide, which is like the one of the major thing that we actually have, that occurs, the one of the major theme, right, that occurs time and time again in our culture, is this conflict between these two great Greek city states, and these weren't just city states, right? These were also major Greek powers within the Greek civilization itself. Athens on one side and Sparta on the other side. And I'll just briefly go through like what Athens and Sparta were known for. So Athens, named after the goddess Athena, which signifies wisdom. But Athena was not just a goddess of wisdom; she also was a symbol of war as well. But in a different aspect, right, from Sparta, which was just solely a god of war alone, which is the god Ares. Okay, Athens. So just show you where Athens and Sparta is. Athens is the orange color circle that you see here in the map, while Sparta is the red color circle that, yeah, that's at the bottom of the Greek peninsula. Okay, so Athens is actually at a very interesting position where it finds that it's often blocking Spartan advances, because Sparta has to like move upwards towards Athens, right, to get out of the land bridge over here. So it was a very natural conflict for these two city-states to go to war against each other most of the time. Okay, but of course that wasn't all, right? That they fought over, because they fought over about their system of government as well. Because Athens was like they used their influence, right, to spread democracy around the Greek world. And this was something that Sparta didn't like, because Sparta favored a monarchy system in which you have kings ruling the population. Okay, over here, the next point I put that Athens ransoms other Greeks, right? I meant like ransoms in the form of extortion, right? Because Athens have a huge, powerful navy that's able to block the trading routes of many other Greek city-states. And using that kind of power, right, Athens is actually able to, like, get Greek cities to pay up, like, extort money from them, like some kind of protection racket. Okay. While on the other hand, right, Sparta does it differently. Sparta has a huge advantage in military power, and so it can just march into a city and take the enemies as slaves. So it enslaves other Greeks. Okay, so one of the interesting thing, right? Although both of them have fought with Persia when the entire Greek civilization faced annihilation from Persia, right? In the end, after that existential threat to Greek civilization passed, right? Sparta actually favored peace with Persia. Okay, so Sparta didn't want to go to war, and you will find that that's actually a very reasonable thing, right? Because if you notice over here, Persia has actually taken a lot of trading posts along the Asian area, right? You see this part called Asia Minor. So a lot of these places that's on the coast are actually Greek trading posts, in which they had to open their trade routes flow through those areas, right? And yeah, that's where their main business and commerce and lifeblood of the trading powers. Yeah, that's where they get their revenues, their trade goods and everything. So and who is the trade power, who is the naval power in the Greek world? Is Athens. And that's why Athens often want to go to war with Persia, so that they can take control of the seas again, while Sparta is a land power, and so it really has no interest. And so if Athens were to weaken itself against Sparta, Athens were to weaken itself against Persia, that's all the better for Sparta. In fact, Persia and Sparta actually had some kind of alliance much later in time, right? So that they could stop Athens from dominating the seas, which is quite an interesting thing. Like once the whole conflict with Persia is over, the alliance shifted again. Okay. But yeah, so today we remember Athens and Sparta as this two contrasting powers during the ancient Greek time period. And this is kind of really the representation that you get of the two of them. Athens being the place where you have the philosophers gathering, talking about philosophy, math, science, and other things, the exchange of ideas. While Sparta, of course, is remembered for its warriors. Both of them important and significant contribution to Greek culture, but in different aspects of Greek culture. One showing off the intellectual side, and one showing off this stubbornness to be defeated. This kind of tenacity in their civilization, and really what we remember of these two cities till this day, how they are characterized. Okay, but now we've come to the end of this period in history where they are all city-states, right? So this is the 400 BCE. But the next period of Greek history, right, was when we find that Greek civilization started to have this idea of empire building. And empire building came in the form of neither Athens and Sparta, right? Because the two of them were in this kind of deadlock competition. Instead, it came from an entirely new power in the Greek world, which is the Macedonia. And Macedonia is ruled by this guy called Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great was known as the person who conquered the known world. And of course, this is a map of his conquest over here. And this is actually the known world back in Greek times, right? So which is the Persian Empire. So now instead of Persia being the one to finally conquer Persia being the one to conquer Greek civilization. It is the Greek civilization that dominated over Persia. All right, so interesting twist of events. So we see here some of the interesting techniques that were developed in the Greek armies just for this conquest of Persia, which is the long pipemans, the pipe formations, right? In which it's a very defensive formation that it's very hard for enemies to penetrate through because obviously of the long rows of pipe that protect the soldiers. And the other thing that was a very interesting development was the Macedonian cavalry, which were a very elite cavalry unit, right? That Alexander commanded himself, right? That that was crucial in a lot of his victories. Okay, so but one thing that one thing to note is that this time period, Alexander the Great, 323 BCE, but very soon, right? He died just after 12 years. So he conquered this whole entire thing in 12 years when he was 20 years of age to until he's 32. But at 32 years old, right, he died a sudden death. And when he died, suddenly his entire empire just fractured. Like it just happened in a span of a few years. After he died, all these generals that had a lot of power within his army, right, just tore apart his empires and fight for their own portions of control. And so you see that his entire empire, right, is now just split upon like this couple of people. Cassandros here in the green color, Lysimachus, Antigonus, Seleucus, and Ptolemies, right? This were all his generals. They just took whatever they could out of his empire just because the main guy died. And in this, we see the weakness of Greek civilization, right? Which is that although it is powerful, although it could come up with new ideas, it was a very fragile civilization that, depended a lot on the strength of just one person, and when that key person has died, all of it will crumble. Okay, so this is the end of the history section of the Greek period. But just talk a bit about the accomplishment that Greek society actually bring to us today. So we still remember like some of the great philosophers in Greece, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. You will hear them time and time again, especially when you just come into an introduction philosophy course, right? You will hear them right from the start, because this is the foundations that they laid out for our philosophy, the logical foundation, the way that you argue and question about reality, all this. Although we no longer follow their concepts, right? But it is the line of reasoning, the line of thinking, right, that we still carry with us till today. Okay, in mathematics, right, you have some of the famous people as well. You have Euclid. Euclid is the one who formed the basis of the geometry system that is still being used today. Pythagoras, of course, you know him because of this thing over here on the left side. This picture is a proof of the Pythagoras theorem. A squared plus b squared equals to c squared. So if you still remember that from back in school. Okay, the next one, Archimedes. Archimedes is the one who is pictured here in the center picture, who screamed Eureka out of his bathtub and then ran around naked in the streets of Greece. Okay, but he had a good reason, because the king actually gave Archimedes a problem, right, to solve. Like, how do I tell if my crown is made of pure gold? And Archimedes found the solution by measuring the water that was displaced from the bathtub. Okay, because like that was a principle of buoyancy that we still learn today in physics lessons. Yeah, so really important scientist, mathematician as well, Archimedes. Okay, in astronomy and geography, right, we also have a lot of Greek advancement. And this guy Aristophanes, you might not have heard of him, but he was actually the person who discovered the first person to measure the circumference of the Earth. And it's this picture on the right here that tells you how he did it. Okay, basically, he could find the distance between 2 points on the Earth, and he managed to find the angle in which the 2 points on Earth, how far apart they are. It's a bit of clever science, but he managed to do that, and because of that, he could just count, like, taking this length, right? How much is the distance of the whole circle that Earth is? So back then, even in Greek time, they already knew that Earth was a sphere. So you can just calculate the circumference by taking the distance of the whole circle. Okay, so important contributions, all of them, to our understanding of the world. But not just that, right? I want to talk a bit about Greek culture as well, which is one of the very influential, uh, things that we still carry to this day, right? Is the names of a lot of the Greek mythology, and the stories that they have as well. So this is a movie. This is a modern movie called Prometheus, but the name, right, actually came from one of the Greek figure who was also named Prometheus. And if you heard of the name Prometheus, then you will know that he's actually this guy on the left, right, who you know that stole fire from the gods, so that humanity actually was able to use fire as the foundation of how we built our civilization. So it was, to the Greeks, it was of course a very important story, right? Because it gives them that idea that, you know, for you to for all of civilization to be built up, right, you actually need to take that sacrifice to actually steal from the gods, to take an act of disobedience. And that kind of bravery, that kind of um, daring, that kind of different, how to put it, you know, that kind of ingenuity, that you don't want to do things the same way all the time, right? But instead you find a way forward, and use that as a foundation to build up an entire civilization, an entire culture. That's what we get from Prometheus. And if you are familiar with the Greek story of Prometheus, right, the sacrifice that he had to pay, right, was that he had to be chained to a rock and have his liver torn from his body every single day by an eagle and eaten by that eagle. So yeah, in some sense, it's a it's a lesson to be learned about defying the gods, but in another sense, it's also a lesson that maybe we should defy our very, like, you know, the way things are, because a progress and advancement in civilization is worth it. Okay, so I think that's the last slide I have about the Greeks. And of course, if you want to, you can go and read up about how much more of Greek culture there is, and how it influenced today's world. But we really need to move on to the next content of the slides, which is the Romans. Okay. All right. The Romans. So for the Greeks, while we remember the Greeks for their ideas, right? We remember the Roman for their, I guess in a sense, for their accomplishments, for their legacy, for the for the things that survive to today. Uh, the more concrete ideas, and I don't just mean concrete in the sense of like what they made, what they built their structures out of, because the Romans actually were the ones to discover concrete, the first people to use concrete to build their housing, to build their huge structures. Over here we see some of their structures, which is the Colosseum, which you can find in Rome. This structure surviving all the way to today. Now, there's not many buildings in human history that can actually survive 2,000 years of history, but this is one of them. But this is not the only Roman structure that does that, right? Over here on the right, we see aqueduct. And an aqueduct is a structure for the Romans to actually supply water to towns that are very far away. So they could actually build, right? They could build large population cities far from, drinking water, because they can just transport that water to wherever it needs. And this is an invention that not many civilization has managed to master. A lot of civilization have to build their cities and towns and population centers, right, based on how available water is to them. But the Romans can just transport it wherever they want. Okay, over here we see a picture of the Roman military, very accomplished military. We'll talk about it a bit later as well. Over here on the right, we see a bathhouse. And this is really one of the things that the Roman culture is known for, is for their baths. And this is not just a place where people go swimming, and I think most people wouldn't go swimming in a bathhouse. It's actually a place where people take a bath, okay, which is to clean themselves. And this is a very social activity in Roman culture. So people go to the bath to not just clean themselves, not just to wash themselves. They also go there because they want to have conversation with others. They go there to talk business. They go there to talk about ideas, politics, things like that. Okay, it is a very social occasion for them, in addition to actually providing that hygiene benefit as well. Killing two birds with one stone, you can call it. All right, so let's move on. Okay. Some of the accomplishments of the Romans, right? You might not even realize it, but it's very significant. It really affects the way we look at the world today, or the way we run our daily lives. So the calendar system is a Roman thing. Our 12-month system, including the leap year, and some of you might wonder, hey, the leap year was then corrected to a Gregorian calendar, right? That is somewhere that happened in the 1600s. But the Gregorian calendar, right, had so little to correct, right, that the calendar that was made in the Roman times, right, even after 1600 years, 1,600 years, right? Even after so long, right? All that it differ from the actual date, right? The number of days that differ from the actual date, right, was just about 13 days. Okay, so the change that was updated to the calendars in the 1600, the year 1600s, that only make a small difference of about 13 days. Okay, so a calendar system, we mainly use the Roman system after all. Okay, our writing system, the idea of using alphabets came from the Romans, and even till today, right, the alphabets that we use, if you go online in the internet and all that, right, you notice this thing called a Latin script. Well, Latin was the Roman language, and so because we are using the alphabets that come from the Roman language, right, we call it the Latin script. Okay. Biological name, of course, Homo sapiens, all these kind of things, they are Roman Latin names. The planets named after Roman gods. Numeral system, we still use quite a lot of the Roman numberings. Maybe not all the time, but it's common enough, right, that you will see it in many places. Medicine, okay, so you might hear that the Greek had a good medical system, and definitely they do. But one of the greatest advancements in medicine actually came from the Roman times. And there's this guy, this person called Galen. He's a doctor. He studied the human bodies, right? And one of the things that he came up with, the concept that was used for so long, of course now is disproven already, but he had this idea that the human body is regulated by 4 different fluids. One is blood, one is phlegm, one is mucus. Mucus is same as phlegm, sorry. One is blood, one is mucus, one is the bowel system, and another one, I think it was pus, if I'm not wrong. So there's this 4 fluids that regulate the body. Of course, there's a disproven theory already, but for a long time, right, because of his in-depth description of the human body, right, people use his system to understand the human body for so long. And when I say so long, I mean for a good 1,500 years like that. Okay, Roman engineering, of course, it's still used today in our concrete, in a lot of in a lot of the roads, right? The road system that you see in Europe today, right? They still retain the original Roman roads, and that's really how sturdy the Romans have actually made their structures out to be. Okay, let's move next. But more important than just their physical accomplishment, right, could be said is what more could be said is that their system of government, uh, and we can really see this, right, because the Roman Republic is an entire democratic system, right, that lasted for 500 years. It's over here from 509 to 27 BCE. Almost a good 500 years of democratic rule. And you know, if you look at the Greek system, right, the Greeks tried to build an empire, but after just 12 years, the whole entire empire collapsed. But the Romans realized, right, to have a functioning country, to have a functioning huge control of a large chunk of land of the world, right? To govern such a huge amount of land, right? What you need is you need a good system. And that is what the Romans actually managed to bring to us.
Hey,
Sorry? Is someone speaking?
I don't think so.
Okay, because I can hear something, but okay, never mind. So it is more or less gone. Okay, so what the Romans managed to do, right, is they managed to have an entire republic system of government, which means representatives of the people. And to have that, to have genuine representatives of the people, you need elections for public office. But the Romans didn't just have elections for public office. They have this idea that every citizen in Rome is responsible for civic life. And that's why they have this whole idea of military service, where the citizens actually have to participate to earn their place in society. And more than just the citizens have to do that, right? The politicians at the top of the government, right? They actually have to make their name through military service as well. Okay? They have a whole public education system because for people to participate in politics, to participate in civic life, right? They need to be educated. You can't have a poorly educated uh, population talking intelligently about daily life or matters of state, right? Without education, like it doesn't make sense. So people were given an education, and it was done through a public education system. Um, in certain aspects, right, they realized that they were lacking, right? They were lacking in terms of their culture, their stories, their myths, and their art. And in those aspects, right, they even adopted the Greek style of art and the Greek stories, because that is, that is something in which they want to build up upon their civilization as well. Okay, and the interesting thing, right, is that Roman society, your slaves are not bound to be slaves forever. The slaves can even earn their freedom, and a lot of times the Romans would actually enslave the Greek intellectuals, right? But they have this kind of condition, like if you educate the Roman people in philosophy, in science, right, in mathematics, you can earn your freedom for your service. So it's a very interesting concept of slavery, not in the traditional form of slavery that we usually think of. Okay, the Romans, of course, have this understanding that you have to maintain a system, and you have to maintain a system, you need to have this idea of due process, like standard things that you cannot violate to keep your system in order. Okay, and I'll just give a brief illustration of like the structure of the society back then, right? And this is more about the governing structure, right? Where you see that there's this idea that there's a system in which you actually become a leader in Roman society. You need to move up this ladder, and this ladder over here, if you see the arrow, it's called the circus honorum, which is a ladder of promotion, right, in your public life. So if you want to be a leader, which is the consul, which there are two consuls at any time elected to Roman society, which is more or less the leaders of the society already at the highest level. Well, before you can ever get there, right, you need to dedicate an entire life to public service. And it's a very interesting concept because you have to work and earn your way up society. Okay, and this is how, this is how their society is structured. Okay, so I'll just go a bit about some of the history that Rome has that Rome has encountered. So Rome versus Greece. This is a time where you actually see the difference between the Romans and the Greeks in terms of their army strength, right? It was so bad, right, that when this Greek kingdom actually this Greek kingdom called Epirus. It was led by this King Pyrrhus of Epirus. Today we remember King Pyrrhus with his name is remembered as the term Pyrrhic victory. And Pyrrhic victory means that a victory that is so costly that if you win the victory is actually as good as a loss, because you cannot actually recover from such a victory. Yeah, it has cost you more than it's worth. Okay, so this was just like on the bottom right is just a picture to make fun of the situation for the kids, but it has that idea, like, winning winning at such cost, right, that is really not worth the victory at all. Okay, there's some map over here, but I won't go into details. But this was how badly the Greek armies were matched against the Romans. Okay, but one of the more important conflicts that the Romans took part in, of course, is with another Mediterranean superpower. And so if you are comparing the Greek against the Persians, right, back then in Greek history, this would be the Persians for the Romans, because Carthage was really a trading power in it's a huge trading power within the Western Mediterranean, the Western Mediterranean. So in Africa, in Spain, and in the islands of Italy, right? This is the power base of this civilization called the Carthaginians. Okay, Carthage. Their home city, of course, Carthage here in the North Africa, where Tunisia would be today. Okay. While Rome, you might think that, oh, Rome had the entire of Italy, right? But that's not true. They were mostly in the if you look at the map over here, it was only the green color territories that were Romans, and I don't mean the green color territories here in the north or on the islands, right? I just mean the green color territory within Italy itself. These were the Roman territories. The green, like the light green and the dark green colors. Okay, but only after they managed to defeat Carthage, right? Then they managed to finally expand their territory into the orange areas, because Carthage was just this kind of superpower that was able to dictate the territories of other countries that were present in that area, and they didn't want Rome to expand. But in spite of that, Rome, of course, won against Carthage, and we remember Carthage today with that march of elephants in the mountains. Okay, which is interesting. One of the interesting stories that live on from Carthage to today, because there's this general who is called Hannibal, and Hannibal Barca, and he led one of the greatest armies in the ancient world. It was said that after this war with the Romans, right? This war between Carthage and Rome, so many more than 2,000 years ago, right? There was never again another conflict that large that used so much manpower and equipment, right? Until the modern age, again, until the modern period. So that's an entire 1,500 years later, right, that we have large-scale conflicts of this nature again. And that's really impressive, because like Rome was actually able to face off such a huge superpower back in the ancient world, and managed to win, and managed to win even though this guy Hannibal, he won every single battle that he fought against Rome until the very last battle. But even so, right, even with how much blood and sacrifice and men that they have lost, and like Rome still, because of the structure of their government, their sturdiness, their military service, their citizenship responsibility for the survival of the entire country, right? They actually came out on top of Carthage in the whole battle, in the whole entire war. Which is amazing, because you imagine a smaller power winning a superpower in spite of all the odds. Okay, but like, to give an idea, like what made the Roman military so amazing, right, is that the Roman military was more than just an army. It had this idea that they were able to be one of the best engineering, the one of the best engineers at that time as well. So, for Romans, right, that their army is able to construct roads, like, they construct roads everywhere. They were able to construct bridges across water whenever they need it to be. So the armies can just cross over large bodies of water, in a short period of time, and very conveniently. They could construct very complex siege equipment, because a lot of the ancient cities, even though they have a war in front of them, even though they have good defenses, right, that was no barrier to a Roman army as well. And you wonder, like, oh, why do you have so much engineers building roads and bridges, right? Well, because for an army of the quality of the Roman army, of that kind of quality, with their heavy armor, with their good training, their expertise and all that, right? The main disadvantage it has, right, is that it cannot be everywhere at once. But if there were more armies, if they could be more places at once, right, then of course, every battle that a higher quality army fights against a lower quality army, right, of course the higher quality army will win. But now the question is that to train a high quality army takes time, takes equipment, takes resources, right? But then you so like the problem being like, okay, I can only have a small number of high quality people. Well, what can you do then? Well, you can get them to different places in your territory much faster, and that's where all the engineers came in, because the Romans were expert at logistics. And this is one thing that you need to appreciate in an army, right? That it is not just the fighting strength of the army that counts in war, but also how is the entire support system that is meant to help the army itself do its job. Okay, so it's not just the strength alone, but the entire support that the army gets in all its battles, in getting to where it was, in feeding them, clothing them, all these aspects of it. The Romans were very good in constructing a well-rounded system. And so when you think of the Romans, right, you think of them as engineers, but they are engineers not in terms of just physical structures, right, but they are engineers in terms of the things that are less apparent, in things like their government, in things of logistics, in things of supply networks and stuff like that. They were engineers in that regards as well. Okay. But okay, so now we come to the fall of the Roman Republic. People might think that the fall of the Roman Empire is the more important time period, right? But I would disagree. It's actually the fall of the Republic, because this the fall of the republic really weakened the Roman civilization to that extent, right? But even though it's weakened so much, right, it still managed to exist for a good 500 years before the entire empire collapsed. But it's very important that we understand how the government and the systems of government fell. Um, okay, I have this YouTube video. Maybe we can take a look at the YouTube video at the end. Uh, but basically, the empire fell, right, because of the kind of things that actually disrupt democracy even in today's modern world. The whole idea where you have warring factions in society that cannot get along with each other, that cannot ever see eye to eye and come to agreement to move the country forward. That was the thing that contributed to the fall of the republic. And the two factions that are represented in the Roman society at that time can be best represented by these two people. So you probably have heard of Gaius Julius Caesar. So he's the person on the right there. Julius Caesar, of course, the great general who was one of the more important figures in Roman civilization, whose name Caesar actually still till today became one of the name for kings in a lot of languages. So like the German Kaiser is named after Caesar, the Russian Tsar is also named after Caesar, right? So it is definitely a very influential person. But the person that you might not heard of is Marcus Tullius Cicero. And this is the person who is on the left, the picture on the left. You see him here carrying a straw, and that perfectly represents him, right? Because Cicero is a lawyer. Okay, he was famous for being a lawyer, for representing people, and he had a way with the cases that he represented, the people that he represented, that all this made in the end made himself to not like today's lawyers where you're just wondering like they're just taking advantage of the law. But Cicero managed to actually show that he's a person that, although just following the law, he represents you to the best of his ability, in a way to show that what he's fighting for ultimately is the correct thing based on correct principles. Okay, so Cicero is a person who is from the Optimates party. So yeah, this word is pronounced Optimates. It's a Roman political party. This is in contrast with Caesar, who was from the Populares. So the Populares is a popularist party. So Popularis, if you know political context, right? It means it's a party that promises favors to people, like in like basically, yeah, at the worst, right? A populist party is someone who would promise favors to people that sometimes they can't even deliver. Sometimes the favors don't make sense at all. Okay, but they still promise in return for votes. Yeah, and sometimes you have problems fulfilling the promise. While Cicero is from a elitist party, which means it's something like the conservatives in America. They are the people who want to preserve the status quo, preserve the rights of the powerful and the rich. Okay, at its worst. Okay, okay, so some of the common things that you will associate, like you have this phrase, right? Whether the means justify the ends, right? So the optimates the optimates party, right, is a party, you know, who would often want the means to be followed. Okay, so that means you have your due process in government. You uphold your traditions that the government had been upholding for since the history long ago, because you want the stability in the government. Like they want the status quo to maintain, and usually why they want the status quo to maintain is because they want the stability of the government to be maintained, even though sometimes that stability can come at a cost of like people's welfare and stuff like that. Okay, while on Caesar's side, right, he would rather have the ends. So like the ends would justify the means. So what you are after is the consequence. As long as it's a good consequence, it doesn't matter what actions you use to get that consequence, right? So you can promise things that are good for people, but then like just for their votes, right? Yeah, you can promise them money because it's good for them, but is it really the best idea to like empty the country's treasury just to give people money for votes? Maybe not. Is it the best idea to steal land from people and then give it to the poor so that they can live on their land? I mean, it's good. It's definitely good if your society is so unequal that you this kind of things have to happen so that the poor have a fair share in the country as well, right? But sometimes it might not be the best idea because like there's a whole lot of problems about like who are you stealing the land from? Is it justified? How is the compensation like? Can a country do this kind of things? Might not always be the case. You can shortcut some of these processes. You can bend the laws a bit, stuff like that. But people will be unhappy, right? Because you took something away from them in the end, and maybe without fair compensation as well. Okay. So over here I have one last line, right, that say assassinators and military. This does not mean that Cicero employed assassins. This does not mean that Caesar used military coups to get his way. But these are the kind of things, right, that people from their party would do. Okay, so Cicero is a party of people who are rich, who are well connected in society, and if they want to get rid of their enemies, they can use assassins to do that. And in fact, Caesar was later assassinated later in life. While militarily, right, Caesar is from a party, right, where you have strong military leaders because he's from a general, he's from people with popular support from the masses, and the masses includes the soldiers that form a great deal of the power base in Roman civilization. So Caesar can use the military to get his way, and sometimes Caesar actually does that, but you will see that it becomes more apparent later on as the Republic actually started to crumble, because with that, right, the traditions that are stopping the military from just doing what they want in society, right, crumble with the laws of society as well. And so the generals that were in power were able to take advantage of the military to get their way more and more. Okay, of course, we talk about the differences between Cicero and Caesar, right? But there are some similarities to take note of them as well. Both of them are not from the upper class. They actually work their way up society. Both of them are very good orators and speakers, and writers as well. They enjoy popular support because they know how to speak to people. Okay, and when I say popular support, right, I mean they enjoy popular support from both sides. Like Caesar can get support from just from people who are not within his party as well. while Cicero, same as Cicero and Caesar, both of them can get support from people who are not from within their party, which is a very important skill for politicians, of course. The another thing is that their influence is felt throughout history. And I'll just go through a bit about their influence. But maybe I'll show you their death. So Caesar was, of course, uh, assassinated by actual people in the government. So that's how much he was hated. And this was what Cicero said about Caesar when he was assassinated. Okay, I won't go through the whole thing, but maybe just the last part, right? Which is, for fear is but a poor safeguard of lasting power, while affection, on the other hand, may be trusted to keep it safe forever. Okay, so one of the things that happened during Caesar's abuse of his power was that he made a lot of enemies, and this is what Cicero had to say about making enemies and using fear to run a country. Okay, the next part, of course, is that Cicero himself, just 1 year later, and so you really see the similarities between these two important figures in history, that just within 1 year dying of each other. While Cicero, when he died, he told the soldier who was going to execute him that, I go no further, approach, veteran soldier, and if you can at least do so much properly, sever this neck. Now, Cicero, because of all he has accomplished in politics, right? After Caesar had died, he made an enemy of some of the important people that were in Caesar's party, the Populares party. So, because they had control over the military, they managed to use the military to arrest and execute Cicero in the end. And even while his death, right, if you look closely at what he said, right, he does not blame the soldier for doing the job of executing him, but as like what he does instead, right, is to tell the soldier that, do a good job and get on with your life in that sense. So is a very characteristic of Cicero, because Cicero is someone, right, who understands the politics at play to an extent, right, that he realized that it's not the soldier's fault that the soldier had to execute him. It was because he himself, as Cicero, he had played the game of politics and lost, and this was the consequence of his own action. And when it's time for him to be executed, he just had to accept that execution, and that his life has come to an end. Okay, so this is something I like to take a small break but to summarize the whole situation in Rome, right? Because of all this of all these deaths, execution, assassination, everything, right? They actually fought an entire civil war before Caesar was assassinated. And in that civil war, right, a lot of the influential people had died in Roman society. So what happened, right, was basically the number of people who were influential in society became smaller and smaller. And when that happened, right, the power became concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer people. And so we have this whole situation that is somewhat mirrors the whole story of Star Wars. And Star Wars actually, the prequels, right, which is the episode 1, 2, and 3, right, it actually very closely mirrors the fall of the Roman Republic. And in fact, right, you actually have a similar concept, because the whole Star Wars government is called the Galactic Republic. You probably have this thought, right, that Star Wars is mirroring something from history, and so and probably they have so what yeah what these four pictures over here, right, is saying is like what happens when power becomes concentrated in the hands of few people. So you have the Jedi coming up and say the Senate will decide your fate, but the this is the future emperor, right? He is so confident, right, that he has accumulated so much power in himself, right, that he is able to just tell off the police, which is the Jedi, who said that I am the Senate, I am the government that you so want to who I am the government that you want to decide my fate. So in the end, uh, because I am the government, I can declare your arrest of me as treason. So it's treason, right? And after after everything, right? Because he has so much power, he just say that I love democracy in the end, because so this speech, of course, in the movie, right, he gave an entire speech of how he loved democracy and that he will give up his power once the crisis is over. But of course, you know that this character in the movies never gave up his power in the end. So it's this kind of irony, right, in which the situation has developed to such an extent, right, that you have ruined all the checks and balances in society that constrains the power of individual people and concentrated the power in just one person, right? To the extent that he can do whatever he wants in society. And it's really that idea of having a dictatorship already at this point in time. Okay, so with that, right, we have finally finished the period of Roman history. I will not bore you with the details of the fall of the Roman Empire, because that is really, as I said, not the more, it's the less significant one. But after the fall of the Roman Empire, then 1,000 years pass, and this 1,000 years is called the Middle Ages, and we are going to skip that as well, because after the 1,000 years have passed, the next significant thing that happened, right, which is probably this period of history called the Enlightenment, the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. The Renaissance first meaning rebirth. Rebirth because it's a rebirth of Roman ideas and Roman culture. Rebirth of ideas from the ancient world. And that's why it has this word Renaissance. And then the next period of history, the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is building, of course, after the period of the Renaissance. After we have collected all the knowledge from the past, we then move forward from there. And you really begin to understand why you call that 1,000 years in the Middle Ages. Because, right, it was only after the Renaissance, right? It was only during the Renaissance, right, that we finally rediscover all this lost art and knowledge from the ancient world. A lot of it was lost during this whole fall of the Roman Empire, because no, literacy was just not there. The public was living off the land, right? They had to work for feudal lords who don't provide them an education, stuff like that. But what happened, right, was that two events, a couple of events, the Crusades happened, and that was when the people went over to the Middle East, and when they fought their wars, right, what they did was they also bring back a lot of the ancient scrolls that were preserved by the Islamic culture when Islam took over all this the land of the Roman Empire. this books, this texts that were from ancient times, right? When these places were conquered during the Crusades, they were brought back to Europe. Another one where such things happened was the Reconquista. Reconquista, if you see here in the bottom picture of the map of Europe, right, you'll see that Spain is actually ruled by Muslims. But then what happened in the end, right, was that Spain was reconquered by the Christians, and when they reconquered that, these areas hold libraries, universities, and stuff, right, where they have a lot of ancient texts that were still preserved. So because of that, right, some of this knowledge were gathered back as well. Another important event was the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire, or fall of Constantinople. Constantinople was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, or you call them the Byzantine Empire. It's this purple area here in Europe, and this when this whole empire fell, all the knowledge that is left over from the Roman civilization finally also went back to Europe, because all these scholars were fleeing the invaders, right, and trying to find places in Europe in which they can actually make use of their knowledge, which is like, to the kings and to the governments of Europe. Yeah, that's where they went to make a living. Okay, so one of the big changes that happened during the Renaissance and the Enlightenment was that power used to be held in Europe by kings and the religion, which is the Catholic Church mainly. But then what happened was that there's this whole transition of period, right, in which they decided that as a society, right, after discussion, after debates and stuff like that, by the philosophers, by the intellectuals, right, there's this shift of mindset in which they decided that truth no longer should be something that you have people in authority telling you this is the right things to believe, this is the right thing to learn, to understand. Like based on Roman history, or based on the Roman medicine, or therefore we should learn the four fluids make up the human body. No, this should not be something that you learn from authority. This is something that you should find out and test it out yourself. So instead of authority, what people decided as a whole, that was this shift to finding things out yourself through your own sense of reason. Okay, and yeah, with the return of knowledge from the ancient world, then they imitated and refined the art and the ideas from the ancient world. Okay, so we have this whole period in history, and after that, you'll find that in terms of artwork, right, this is something in which even so the picture back here is one of this picture I have that taken from this series of painting. Like the artists of the time in the Enlightenment, right, they really like to take their subject matter as the ancient civilization, classical civilization, and you will see that a lot in their paintings, a lot in the style of their art as well. So that's how much the culture was influencing people back then. Okay, so something about Cicero, if you have not heard about him, how much his influence extend to this period in history, right? Cicero wrote more than 3/4 of all the literature that was found during his lifetime. I don't mean during the whole Roman history, right? But during that period of time where his Cicero was alive, right? He wrote more than 3/4 of everything that was recorded. Okay, so that's a really amazing thing, right? Because that was how well documented that period of history that happened during the fall of the Roman Republic, right? Yeah, we have such a good detailed record of everything that happened during that time period, and all thanks to Cicero. Okay, so because of Cicero's because of Cicero's presence in this point in time, right? Since Latin was being used as the language of education up to the 1800s, so a lot of people, because when they study Latin, right, Cicero was the only person who they have access to when they study the language. They found so many of Cicero's work once they rediscovered all this old material from ancient times, right? Most of them was written by Cicero himself. So when you study about Latin, you're studying what he wrote. And yeah, so when public education was encouraged and public education conducted in Latin, an entire young generation was exposed to the ideas that Cicero had actually written back in his days. And these ideas were about the principles and process about how you structure a government, how you structure a society, how you structure a republic. And because of that, right, his writings actually inspired the new forms of new ideas about how to form government in the modern world. And that caused the American Revolution and the French Revolution as well. The two important revolutions that happened during the period of the Enlightenment. And you can see his influence, right, the Roman influence and Cicero's own influence, right, in how the United States named the Senate and the Capitol, both of these buildings, right, and not just the buildings, right, but the structure in which they are as part of society today in the United States, right, they are named after the Roman equivalent. Okay, so these are just some other examples of how influential Cicero is. So his opponent from the other party, Julius Caesar, right? Instead of insulting him, what Julius Caesar had was high praise for Cicero, because even though Julius Caesar was a general who actually managed to invade and conquer land for the Romans, right? What he had to say of Cicero is this, that it is more important to have greatly extended the frontiers of the Roman spirit than the frontiers of the Roman Empire. Now, I mean, for someone to belittle his own accomplishments, right, and to sing praise of their opponent, right, I think this is something that really shows how much respect Caesar had for Cicero. Okay, so another thing that happened much later in history, during the French Revolution, right, is this French politician de Moulin. De Moulin said back then during the French Revolution, right, how the revolution can be so enthusiastically carried out, right, was because mostly young people who, nourished by the readings of Cicero at school, had become passionate enthusiasts for liberty. And that, of course, contributed to the French Revolution. Okay, so some of Cicero's quotes that, is still very relevant today. Let your desires be ruled by reason. Okay, that a wise man would reject pleasures to secure other greater pleasures, or else he endures pains to avoid worse pains. Okay, the third one, a field cannot yield a harvest without cultivation. No more can the mind yield a harvest without learning. Okay, the last one, friendship makes prosperity more shining and lessens adversity by dividing and sharing. And okay, So with that, we actually come to the end of our presentation. This is just something for you to take home after the entire 1.5 hours here with me today.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Jen. So far, any questions from anyone? It's just a very good, explanation. Romans and the Greeks civilization has influenced how it has influenced our culture. Anyone has any questions? Looks like nobody has any questions.
Yeah, feel free to ask anything. Not sure how many of you are still with us right now.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay, I think if there's no question, I think what we'll do is we'll just end. And
Okay, maybe before we end, right? I'll just play uh, something that actually gives an idea of like what Roman politics was like back in the past. Yeah, it is of course a dramatization, but it gives you the idea of the characters that involved back then. And it also gives you an idea of who Cicero is and how influential he is. Um, yeah, how influential just alone his words were. So let me just click on this, and I will definitely need to change the screen, but just give me a moment. But if you have any questions, if you are too shy to ask directly, you can also feel free to just type it out. Okay, so I'll just change the screen for a bit. Okay, so just give a a bit of a background, right? This short video that I'm going to share is about how one of the person from Julius Caesar camp, right? After Caesar was assassinated, this guy gained power within the Caesar's faction. So he's of course an enemy of Cicero. When this person is Mark Antony. So when Mark Antony wanted the Senate, the Roman government to vote his way, right? Cicero make a stand, but Cicero, what he did, right? What Cicero did was just to deliver a letter, and that letter would disrupt the plans that this guy Mark Antony had to get the rest of the government to vote for him, because you just watch the video and see what the rest of the people in the government did, and you understand like how impactful Cicero's words were.
I'm so sorry. Am I late?
We have completed taking roll. A quorum exists.
Excellent. Then, let us begin. Actually, not quite yet. I see that Cicero outdoes me in his tardiness.
Cicero is regrettably ill and unable to attend this session.
But he has an important matter to propose regarding my governorship of Gaul. Should I send my litter bearers to carry him here?
He did, however, provide me with a speech that he most urgently insisted be read into the rolls.
Then, by all means, let us hear the words of mighty Cicero.
These being the words of Marcus Tullius Cicero. When I was a young man, I defended our state. As an old man, I shall not abandon it. I give sincere thanks to Mark Antony, who has generously presented me with the most promising theme imaginable. I address you directly, Antony. Please listen as if you go on. Please listen as if you were sober and intelligent and not a drink-sodden, sex-addled wreck. You are certainly not without accomplishments. It is a rare man who can boast of becoming a bankrupt before even coming of age. You have brought upon us war, pestilence, and destruction. You are Rome's Helen of Troy. But then,
Go on. Go on.
a woman's role has always suited you best.
All right.
Didn't know that Mark Antony was so cruel.
Yeah, well, he was the one who called for the execution of Cicero after all. So, yeah, he definitely had a had a grudge to bear against Cicero, definitely.
Okay.
All right.
Right. So any other questions from anyone? If not, I think we'll just end tonight. It's already 9:47. So thank you very much, Jen, for the time. I think it's been quite enlightening for me, especially to know what actually these two civilizations, how they influence our modern world, the way we think, the way we run our governments, the way that we structure our modern society as well. So thank you so much. Okay, see you everyone. Okay, I will end the meeting now.
Thanks and good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, good night.
Hey, thanks for coming.
Okay, bye. Bye-bye. Hi, Peter. Who is this Peter here? Hello.
Hi, Peter.
Hi, Peter.
Actually, I wanted to share the links to my slide, but I guess like everyone's gone already.
Hi, Peter. Okay. Let me
All right.